Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto 2 Blue Vortex manga speculation video. So this one's going to be ahead of chapter 7, which is going to be releasing on February 20th. So we're just under 2 weeks out from the chapter, when I usually like to do these discussions kind of in between chapters. So as ever, we will do a little bit of reflection on the previous chapter, chapter 6, and discuss what might happen in chapter 7. So I'll actually open this up here this time with just the more general, I think, thing that's been happening across recent chapters in the village. And that is more and more characters coming to doubt their own memories and move towards the truth about Boruto and Kawaki and the switch that basically their memories have been altered. In recent chapters, we have seen Amado basically be in the category of now deeply skeptical, questioning, and effectively knowing the truth. He has in his mind accepted that Boruto and Kawaki are flipped in his head for some reason, and then in the last chapter, Shikamaru basically made the exact same jump. And it seems like they're now going to begin this kind of boulder rolling down the hill. The momentum is building. More and more characters are going to start to feel this way. Now, they might choose to have it be this situation where only key characters fully make the jump and side with Boruto, and so we have this kind of core group of characters trying to convince everyone else, but not everyone makes the jump. But you can see little bits and pieces beginning to happen, because like you have to add like Mitsuki into this kind of category of like, we expect chapter 7 will focus quite a bit on that. Himawari already seems to be in a little bit of this category as well, whether that just be because she's always had relatively positive views on, Boruto and Kawaki, so the flip doesn't change things too much, but she has that weird sense that Naruto's alive, so she seems to be able to see through things maybe a little bit more than the other characters, and it just continues to keep happening. So even say someone like Ino in the last chapter, she was there facilitating the the discussion between Boruto and Shikamaru. She overheard what was said, and she was questioning it, but for her as a character, you almost feel like, might it actually be enough of a thing where like someone so important to her as a character of like Shikamaru, her teammate, the current kind of leader of the village, him moving into the situation where he doubts things will make her begin to question things? And is that how we're going to have that kind of slowly this thing begins to maybe fall apart and everyone is doubting things? Because there's so much going on, but we have to remember that we are ultimately trying to get to a situation where we do reverse this switcheroo somehow. So that's just this kind of first point here, especially when they introduce this plot element here, where one of the new villains is, of course, targeting Naruto. So the second he comes to the village looking for Naruto, and if he says anything along the lines of, like, I know he's alive, I can sense him, I don't think the village is just going to be like, hey, you're an idiot, he's dead. I think this will create a lot of doubts, and they basically said that much, that I think it was Demon who kind of pointed out that there's only a select few people who know Naruto is alive, but now we know one of the villains knows that he is and is targeting him. Your story, Kawaki, is going to fall apart at some point. How do you feel about that? So part of, I suppose, Kawaki's dedication and what's going to drive him going forward is, of course, now going to be keeping the lie up. He might want to act very quickly against these villains to stop them from arriving in the village, talking to people, and this reveal coming out, because Kawaki hasn't really been in the focus as much, especially in recent chapters, but since we kind of came back with 2 Blue Vortex, he has not felt as important as he has before, partly because they made the decision that they're maybe not going for the full-on Boruto versus Kawaki stuff very early on. They're going to hold that back. It seems like we're going to be dealing with these new villains and maybe some other plot elements first, and then getting around to the more personal stuff, the big setup from the end of part 1. But we definitely, I think, need to get more into Kawaki, and I have a point about Kawaki later on where we'll discuss that a little bit more. But then in terms of what's actually going to happen in chapter 7, so the cliffhanger ending to the chapter is, of course, that Mitsuki has caught up with Boruto. They're out of the range of the village now, so no one, I suppose, is going to interrupt this, perhaps. They maybe roughly know a sense of where they are, but they're outside of range. Mitsuki has confronted Boruto, and it looks like a fight is about to happen. Now, this is where we bring up the idea of, like, okay, what are they doing here? So we know Mitsuki has some major issues with, Kawaki, but because of the switch, he views it as he has issues with Boruto. But as we saw in the last chapter, he is doubting things enough to knock out Kawaki, his son, to his moon, and he's lying to Shikamaru, the leader of the village, about, like, his actions, kind of saying that, hey, I'm more suited for this mission, while Kawaki lies unconscious on the ground, having been knocked out by some sort of snake venom type stuff. Those are pretty crazy actions from Mitsuki. Now, if you've seen the anime, you know there was the kind of quite long Mitsuki kind of arc that they added in that kind of showed him doing maybe something more along these lines. But still, for most of his characterization, you don't typically expect Mitsuki to go a little bit kind of renegade kind of like this. And, the reason it's happening is because he is having these doubts. The doubts are for sure inspiring most of these actions, that he doesn't view Kawaki as being in line with the person he knew from, like, weeks before, basically. That's the issue from basically across the time skip, especially like 3 years ago. The person he knew as being very close to is now treating him very differently. What's the situation there? Kawaki is not doing his part of the role to kind of keep up the act that he basically is Boruto. And he's seeing that now. And so because everyone is beginning to maybe latch onto the idea that there's some sort of weirdness between the Kawaki-Boruto situation, that must mean Boruto is the one who has the answers or something like that. So, of course, Mitsuki is furious, and it looks like an actual fight is going to happen. I'd be very surprised if maybe we open up and Mitsuki just turns off the Sage Mode and starts to talk. So Boruto realizes, I think, that we're getting a fight, that he's probably going to have to hurt Mitsuki at least a little bit. But I do think we're going to potentially get to a point where there is some sort of a conversation, Mitsuki can realize what's happening here, and we get some resolution coming out of this. So my thoughts on this are that, just from a fight perspective, Boruto has been presented as being top level. Like, the amount of jutsu he seems to have, the levels he has gone up over the last couple of years, I think it probably has to put him above Mitsuki. But they don't want to completely undermine Mitsuki and just have Boruto completely demolish him. So what are they going to do here? And this is where I do think Boruto's kind of unwillingness to fight at full power, or unwillingness to deliver a finishing blow, this might be what helps Mitsuki to actually realize that, hey, you have something that Kawaki doesn't have. You, as my deadly enemy, are treating me more like my old friend Boruto, basically, Kawaki used to. And it's that whole idea that the connection isn't really there with Kawaki currently, but even though it's this crazy situation, he is feeling that connection with Boruto here. And so it does feel like it kind of has to end with Mitsuki questioning things enough that he comes to support Boruto. Because in his head, I sure it has to be happening here, that Mitsuki has, in a way, devoted himself to Boruto. I will follow you. Basically, we are kind of linked in that way. Kawaki's not acting like that at all. Boruto is inspiring him even as the villain, as he perceives it in his mind. And because it's such an important thing here, it feels like we're maybe going to have a Shikamaru or Amado-esque, like, this will be the moment where he gets to that point where he realizes, oh, my memories must have been altered, and so the doubt can kind of persist. So that's that situation. I don't really see it going any other way. Now, obviously, they at times in the writing do have a tendency to sometimes make things go on longer than they need to and just really extend them out. I hope that doesn't happen, because obviously fights do tend to take up a lot of time on the page, and I'd be surprised if they maybe go overboard with the fighting here, just in terms of like they don't want to maybe spoil Boruto and Mitsuki's full movesets if they're going to be involved in more notable fights somewhere down the line. But they still want to make it important because it is two kind of friends fighting. But yeah, after this, and again, I'm very unclear about, like, I'd be surprised if the full chapter is Boruto versus Mitsuki, because, like I said, I think it's going to be more of a story-based fight rather than a proper fight that will have a true kind of conclusion. So after their encounter, whatever way it wraps up, the setup from the end of the last chapter was that Boruto and Shikamaru need to talk again via the kind of mind transfer, the transmission. And we need to see how Shikamaru can help Boruto in secret, basically, because Shikamaru is aware that, okay, I've seen through this, but everyone else hasn't. But I need to help you. And also the reverse would, of course, be Boruto telling Shikamaru the kind of truth of the situation to confirm his suspicions. And the big thing, I suppose, will be the reveal that Naruto is actually alive. Because, of course, the almost surprise focus from last chapter was that, yes, Shikamaru has not officially taken up the role as the 8th Hokage. He has had this thing where he set up this kind of 3-year kind of time period, and it's coming to the end of that, and he should be accepting it at any point now, but he hasn't. So there's been a doubt in the back of his head, and so Shikamaru finding out that Naruto's alive must be a pretty important thing here that will drive Shikamaru forward to get Naruto back, that, like, I don't need to take up the position of Hokage. And I feel that's part of why they introduced that element, was to kind of connect the dots here a little bit. And yeah, that's just connecting the dots there a little bit. So then the other point here, and I really still don't really know what to make of this. One of the more notable points from last chapter was when Boruto does leave Sarada and Sumire. He says back to them, mainly it's aimed at Sarada, I swear to rescue Master Sasuke and everyone else who has turned into trees. As well as ... And he's cut off before he can finish what he's about to say. But he looks at Sarada specifically, and it seems to suggest that, like, okay, there's something else very, very important going on here. Like, what's he talking about here? Is it as simple as just, as well as I will reverse the situation here and get things back to normal? Is it something about the future? And that's the kind of point I may be making here about, we haven't really addressed Momoshiki since we've entered 2 Blue Vortex. What's happening with Momoshiki, the Otsutsuki that is still inside Boruto, who has not kind of shown himself in quite a while? Has Boruto had more visions of the future? Is that perhaps what's being referred to here? Because I think some people have speculated that has he seen some sort of a future where Sarada gets, like, taken out in some way, and so in or around this time period Boruto realizes he needs to be around to protect Sarada from something happening. And then also, has Momo helped or supplied information on their new enemy? Given that he's an Otsutsuki, he would probably have more information on what exactly a Ten Tails is capable of, what a jutsu like the Clawgrime mark would do to a Ten Tails. We definitely need to get an update on Momoshiki. Now, I feel they're saving him up for a moment where Boruto will truly be exhausted and tested by an enemy and be on the verge of being defeated, and then that will leave the opening for Momoshiki to kind of take over, because the situation here is that since Momoshiki healed Boruto from death, it means Momoshiki can never forever take over Boruto's body, but the threat of him taking over for like a little bit is still there, is kind of my understanding of it. So I'm very interested to see how that goes, and like how much of Boruto's training has maybe been to suppress Momoshiki, and just kind of what's happening, because like Boruto and his karma, there's so much more with Boruto. He has all these other jutsus now, but like we're not really addressing like what the focus in terms of Boruto and abilities has been, let alone whatever's going on with like the Jogan, if they're ever going to come back to it. I assume they have to eventually, but what's the situation there? And then we have the situation here with the villains of like, are we actually going to come back to the villains in this chapter? Because we didn't see them in the last one. What's their plan of attack? Are their motivations still like evolving? That's what I'm interested to know about, because they seem to just have a motivation that's just slightly different than normal. They still want to ultimately consume a Otsutsuki, turn into a divine tree, and get some sort of a chakra fruit. But now they have this extra thing where, based on like the personality that they've kind of based themselves on, they have a specific target that they want to consume. Just because of some sort of a thing where like I've taken the appearance of this person, I now want to in a way consume the person in a way most important to the person that I look like. And it's this weird like almost reversal of their like emotions. So Sasuke of course deeply cares about his daughter, so the guy who the divine tree character who looks like Sasuke now wants to basically attack effectively the person who Sasuke cared about the most and consume them. And is it this weird misunderstanding of emotions or something like that going on? I'm interested to see how that actually like evolves, because it felt like they just gave us almost everything with the villains like immediately. Like, how much more is there to know until they start their attack? And it almost feels like we can't be waiting too long, surely, because we do have so many different groups of characters to build up to, have all these fights because they're with various different groups of characters, because like Konohamaru's involved, Moegi's involved, Moegi's team is involved, Inoshika Cho. They have a conflict with one of these characters, and then of course the main cast is involved in even more of it as well. So there's that. Not to mention that like one of them is targeting Ada, which is very interesting. That's going to bring like Demon kind of properly into play for one of the first times. And then just with regards to the logistics, while we know a little bit about this, I definitely want to know what exactly will happen if one was to consume an Otsutsuki. I think they mentioned in a previous chapter that they want to achieve this final form, this ultimate form, which is when they do consume an Otsutsuki. But they made the point that they're all still connected. While there is this oddity to them that they have formed these 4 unique identities, they did make the point that they are all kind of one in some way. So if one of them eats Boruto or Kawaki, does just that one become the tree? Or do they all merge back together and become the tree? And then if they do become the tree and they have the fruit, then based on what we know from like previous iterations of this, it is just a fruit there that an Otsutsuki would then grab and eat. But they obviously want to make use of this themselves. So what happens here? Is it going to be that their form in this divine tree form will be like evolved in such a way where they can kind of eat the fruit that they've kind of grown themselves? Or maybe the fruit is not even required. It's just that by eating an Otsutsuki, they start this situation where they basically feed off the planet themselves and evolve, and the fruit isn't really something that necessarily comes into play because it's not to be given to someone else. They're going to take it themselves. That's an interesting idea, just to see like what exactly happens here, because I still think we're ultimately playing with that idea of the Otsutsukis want to continuously consume planets to gradually achieve godhood. What's the situation with these characters is, I think, basically the same thing, except they also want to achieve, I suppose, full intelligence as well. That will be one of the benefits that they get out of this, which, depending on how that goes, could be really fascinating. Now, we seem to know, of course, that Boruto is not going to get eaten. Kawaki, of course, can't get eaten because we are still building towards the flash forward scene, which hasn't happened yet. But we're of course waiting to see what happens. So that sort of suggests that unless another Otsutsuki arrives on the scene, these guys can't really succeed. So what's going to be the big setup there? Some final points here are just that I would like to see what someone like, say, a Sakura is up to, or a Kakashi. Sakura mainly because, of course, it's Sarada's mother. It feels like she has to be informed about what happened to Sasuke. And because she is so close to, like, you know, Naruto's family and stuff like that as well, it does feel like there would be a significance placed on having a relatively powerful character like her. Is she going to start to doubt things sooner rather than later? Kakashi is a quite important character as well, just because, of course, we're always thinking about how did Sarada do her key training in terms of learning anything about the Mangekyo Sharingan. And Kakashi is kind of left as one of the only characters who you feel like she could learn from. And again, we haven't really focused on Kakashi in recent times. So what's going on with him? He's intelligent. Is he having doubts? What would make him doubt things and break through what's happening? That's very interesting. And then I just think with Sarada and Sumire, after a pretty good start, it does feel like the reality of, like, we're still maybe not going to get as much focus on them as we want is becoming clear. So I do wonder how they're going to explore answering the question about why they're immune to, like, what happened. It feels like a plot that needs to get focus at some stage, but like how, when, where, why. The only thing I can think of is that with Amado now in full-on doubting mode, if they were to reveal, like, their situation properly to him, especially now, currently, he might have more of an explanation for what exactly has happened here. Not to mention, let's not also forget the thing with Amado and his daughter. That is something that we have to build to at some point. Like, there's a lot of moving plot threads here where nearly all of these main characters have something going on that needs a bit of focus at some point, but I don't know when it's going to exactly play out, obviously. So yeah, that's fascinating, just because, of course, Amado now realizes it's Kawaki who he actually needs. Is there a chance that happens soon? Because, like, Kawaki's unconscious on the ground at the moment. My assumption is he's going to get back up pretty quickly, but we'll see what happens. And then just a final point on Kawaki himself, because I realized going through this that, like, I mentioned Kawaki like once or twice going through this a little bit, but that, oh yeah, like, I'm not really focusing all that much on the character who you would say was, like, the focus of a large part of part 1 of Boruto was Kawaki. And it's so interesting to see how he has really played second fiddle to Boruto in Two Blue Vortex, like, the whole time through. Because he has mostly just been characterized as being focused on taking out the Otsutsuki, so that's why he's still targeting Boruto. He now wants to take out the new villains. It seems like, at least in part, because they're Otsutsuki related, but also because they might be the key to unraveling basically the what's happening, what the switch that has happened, Kawaki's story, the lie he's kind of keeping up. Otherwise, Kawaki just seems to be treating the people who do actually care about him poorly, and he's isolating himself from them. So the key characters here are, of course, Mitsuki, who he's basically meant to be best friends with. He's putting zero effort in there. And then Ada, who this is where, like, I don't even know, is he aware of how much Ada likes him? But he is treating her pretty poorly. And he's just not paying attention to kind of her feelings, like, at all. He's just kind of, I guess, focused on her because he knows she is extremely powerful, and the switch happened because of her, and so he's kind of protective of her because of that. But Ada, of course, wants Boruto basically to knock some sense into him. So I'm eager to see when Kawaki properly comes into play here, because I'm assuming Kawaki will face off against one of the Divine Tree characters, probably the one that looks like Jigen, and that will give him a fight. But we need the main characters to, like, talk to Kawaki. I think Boruto and Kawaki have to have a notable conversation that really gets to the heart of, like, what are you doing? What are you up to right now? Do you not realize that you are, like, not being yourself in the way you are handling things right now, that you are taking this kind of cowardly way out by handling things in the way that you have. Like, you need to get a hold of yourself here. And I'm interested to see when we get to that. But it is a bit of a complicated situation that we're in. But again, we do have to go back to the fact that, of course, Mitsuki versus Boruto is where we're going to be, I guess, focused on for, I suppose, most of, I would assume, the next chapter. I'd be surprised if this is the whole chapter, unless they want to make a huge deal out of this fight. But I can't see it really going any other way except Mitsuki's doubt beginning to grow more and more, and it resolving itself in some sort of a way where Mitsuki sees the truth about Kawaki and Boruto to some degree. He might still have a lot of questions, because I think a lot of the characters who are doubting things, they are very much having to force themselves to be like, no, this is the truth of this matter, in the same way that Sasuke did, and it seems like he had to do this throughout all the years of training and stuff like that. Really always remember the logic, which is why I'm on this guy's side, even though everything else points to it being the opposite. So they're my thoughts heading into chapter 7. I'm of course excited for the review on the 20th of February, so check out that video when it comes out. But otherwise, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are about what you think is going to happen in 2 Blue Vortex chapter 7. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.